Good job, everybody. Okay, we're not going to take up too much of your time. This is meant to be kind of brief, to the point, but very educational and practical for you. Okay, so we're going to go about 20 minutes, 20 to 25, and then we're going to open up for about 5 minutes of questions. So I do want you to be thinking of questions that you have. Okay, for me, it's so much more helpful to know how to direct different educational components when I can get questions. So don't just passively listen, but try to think, how does this apply to me? How does this apply to somebody I might know? And we'll have that opportunity to ask questions towards the end, okay, 5 to 10 minutes. But let's talk about this topic, which many of you have probably, if you follow any type of social media or anything like that, you're probably seeing this influx of information about the vagus nerve. And so the purpose of these, it's actually going to be a series of talks, is to try to really understand the facts behind this and not get caught up in a lot of the kind of gimmicks and things out there that are going on in relation to the vagus nerve. The actual underlying science of it is super, super important. And we're learning so much about this very crucial nerve in our body. And so while people are doing a lot of chatter about it, that's an indication that there's something here, but we want to provide the science behind it. And that's what we're really known for, is science and data. So we're going to talk about this and talk about how important it is for your health and your overall performance. Okay, the vagus nerve is super important. I'm putting it right there next to the brain and breathing. And all of you know how much doc is about breathing and the brain. Well, the connector between the brain and the breathing and the heart is this vagus nerve. It's the superhighway that connects it. And the more we understand about this, the more we understand about our performance today, but also where we're going in the future. Okay, we do a lot of work in peak performance. I just got back from San Francisco at the 49ers, heading up to New York City for a peak performance thing in a couple days. But then we also do a lot of work in people with people that have neurodegenerative diseases, ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. The common denominator is the brain. The brain, we all have a brain. And what we're good at, what we're the best at, I would say, Royer Neuroscience, is strengthening the brain. And so in order for us to strengthen the brain, we have to understand how this vagus nerve works. And the nice thing about it is it can be measured real easily. There's a lot of you on here that are actually measuring your vagus nerve through the polar strap that we use, which gives us, through the heart, gives us a proxy or a representation of what the vagus nerve is doing. So let's talk some about what this thing is. Okay, so the gold area or the yellow area here is actually an illustration of where this vagus nerve goes. It has a couple other names. It's referred to as the 10th cranial nerve, meaning you have more than one cranial nerve if this is the 10th one, okay? The other thing that it's been referred to kind of in the lay literature is the wanderer or the wandering nerve, because we don't have any nerve that's like this in our body. It is absolutely huge. It's the largest nerve that we possess, and it wanders up from the brain through every single organ, and it attaches itself and it interfaces with that. And you're going to find out why it does that. But it acts as the superhighway communication from the brain to all these different organs. Okay. Super, super important that it's communicating correctly. It's referred to the wanderer, the 10th cranial nerve. And before it was called the vagus nerve, it was actually defined over 100 years ago as the great nerve, which here's a little plug for a recent book, a book that Amy and I have recently gone through, actually, I've gone through it twice now, written by a neurologist from New York who really invented the first vagus nerve stimulator. It's fantastic, Dr. Tracy. It's called The Great Nerve. It was just released in 2025. Fantastic read. It's not super complicated, but I strongly recommend all of you guys read this book. It is a great book, or listen to it on audio. It's super important. It starts to look at some of the new research in vagus nerve stimulation and optimizing that in relation to rheumatoid arthritis, RA, into irritable bowel, into lupus, into any inflammatory disease, how this impacts. Its original work was in epilepsy and how it basically changed the face of seizure disorder by stimulating the vagus nerve. So something that I strongly recommend for you to read. But the great nerve, the vagus nerve, the wander, the 10th cranial nerve, it starts up in the brain and it goes into all these different organs. And it has, this is really amazing, it has over 200,000 nerve fibers. So that's a lot of these fibers that are communicating and connecting to different things. You have a few hundred fibers that literally control how much you're going to exhale, and a few hundred that control how much you're going to inhale. I never really thought about that, but we have a certain regulation, like we can't inhale too much or exhale too much. And the vagus nerve defines that through a few hundred nerve fibers related just to inhalation and exhalation. But these 200,000 fibers connect from the brain to the rest of the organs. And you have these things that are called afferent nerves and efferent nerves. Talk about complicated, right? Could you come up with a better way to define these? But efferent nerves are nerves that start the brain and they go down to the organs. Okay. Then you have afferent, which come from the organs back to the brain. So of these 200,000 nerve fibers, there's 160,000 of them that start from the organs and communicate up to the brain. So this is what allows the body to send all kinds of signals. 80% of the signaling is coming from your body, going up to the brain, giving your brain information about how each organ is working. I mean, that's really cool, right? Those nerve fibers also interface with your senses. So you have information about the environment on how my brain needs to respond to the environment. Okay. So you have all this input that the brain is getting, and then the brain only is taking 20% away from itself down into those organs. Okay. Originally, we thought that the vagus nerve only controlled like neurological electrical signals. But the big, huge boom in this research in the last 20 some years, 20, 30 years, has been the understanding, actually the early 2000s, that the vagus nerve is actually more related to anti-inflammation. Very important, because inflammation is at the root of almost everything that we're dealing with. Depression, sleep problems, weight issues, these other disorders like rheumatoid arthritis and other things that we talked about all come out of inflammation, neuroinflammation related to things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all these things. And what's been discovered and why we're so excited about the vagus nerve is the vagus nerve is the primary agent in decreasing inflammation in your body. That's why we want the vagus nerve working really, really well. So here are a few things that I'm putting up here related to inflammation, okay? Things that you may not have thought about, but they are a significant component of this. Things like anxiety, poor sleep, brain fog, attention disorders, fatigue, muscle pain, autoimmune disease, depression. These are all related to inflammatory processes. I'm a specialist on the brain, so these things have a lot of concern to me. So when I'm trying to deal with somebody with anxiety, I need to be thinking about what's the role of the vagus nerve in this. Or I'm thinking about depression. A good way to think of this, because this might be a little bit confusing, is you ever, when you're sick, you don't feel well, right? You're sick, you have the flu, the fever, there's some type of inflammation internally, okay? How do you feel? Okay, you don't feel like going and running 3 miles, right? You don't feel like going out and being social. You feel like just kind of getting warm and sitting in your bed and just eating comfort food, right? Well, it's very interesting that if you looked at psychologically, how do you feel when you're inflamed? You feel kind of removed from people. You don't want to interact. You feel like you don't have any energy, kind of depressed, right? And that's an example of in that microcosm of what we have all experienced, like the flu or, getting, having some type of bacteria or infection or COVID, right? How there's such a similarity if you were to just kind of play those symptoms out psychologically to what it's like when somebody's really overwhelmed. And that's where inflammation comes in. The brain and body get out of sync and they kind of fight against each other. And it's there ultimately that can lead to what's called autoimmune, where the body kind of fights on itself, right? And the vagus nerve is really at the core of managing this inflammation. So let's look at a couple other things, okay? Um, most of the time, what you're inundated with in our culture is just looking at behaviors that are one-dimensional and give you a diagnosis and give you a pill. You're way more complex than that. You're not just a downstream agent that a chemical is going to change this behavior and so everything's resolved. I actually want to know, why is the person having the migraines? Not can I just take the migraines away and mask them, but what's going on in the nervous system, in the brain, in the vagus nerve. So we really want to encourage you to look away from downstream and look upstream. What's the regulation in the body? What's the physiology doing? Can I measure things objectively, not just check things off a checklist, but measure my brain, my body, my vagus nerve? And we're going to explain a little bit of that today. So this is the way I want you to think about the vagus nerve. It's kind of like it's this master um, regulator. Okay, it's like this control tower. We all fly in and out of airports, some more than others. I think I've been in and out of airports the last couple weeks, and the next few weeks maybe 7 times. I mean, I've got trips all over the place, and we don't think about it because we're just in our own single plane. But there's a lot going on with air traffic control and landing planes at the right time, breaking them on the runway, and other planes accelerating and taking off. And then there's communications with the planes, there's communications with the gates, there's all of this going on. And what I want you to think about is the vagus nerve, okay? Its job is this massive communicator. It communicates with everything, and it's kind of getting the pulse of all the different organs and what's going on in the body and in the environment. Okay, is there stress in the environment? And it's sending that up to the brain, and it's trying to regulate it and communicate it with it. The two main areas are the heart and the lungs. Actually, three: heart, lungs, and gut. Okay, those three, the vagus nerve is taking that data up to the brain a lot. And that's why when you get nervous up here psychologically, what kind of is that feeling that you have in your gut? The butterflies, things out of, oh my gosh, I feel kind of nauseous. That's signals that started here, but it got down there through the vagus nerve, okay? It's your air traffic controller for your body, okay? So let's go to this last section of it. And the biggest part of this, apart from anti-inflammatory, massive communicator, is its job, and this is really what I want you to understand, and this is what gets us in trouble. When the vagus nerve doesn't have tone to it, when you don't have good vagal tone, you lose the ability to brake pedal. So the number one thing, how it does all of this stuff, is it acts as a braking mechanism. It keeps everything in check. And when it's not working, all the organs, the body, the sensory input gets accelerated because there's no brake pedal to keep it under control. Every little thing is setting me off because my vagus nerve's brake pedal is not activated like I want it to. Okay. So its job is it's this calming of the stress response. It improves our recovery, decreases inflammation, increases resilience, but its job is to break the pedal on stress. It is what's supposed to keep the stress under control. And when it's not doing its job, our body gets more reactive to that. So let me give you an example. Your heart, your heart is beating. It's a muscle and it's beating, right? If it didn't have the vagus nerve, everybody on here, I mean, we got, tons of people on here. Everybody in here, if we took away your vagus nerve from your heart would start beating at 105 to 110 beats a minute. That's its natural default is 105 to 110. But I doubt we have very many people on here that have a pulse or a heart rate that high. I took mine this morning and it was a 52. I tend to run a little bit low on my heart rate. But why it's a 52 is not just my heart, it's because the vagus nerve is keeping that under check. Okay. And in some diseases, when the vagus nerve loses its tone, we naturally see a rise in heart rate, where the heart rate gets higher and higher and higher up closer to the 105 because the vagus nerve is not doing its thing. When it's doing its thing in a basic physiological world of just heart rate, and there's many other things going on, emotions, other organs, those things, but just in the heart rate space, it keeps your heart at that lower rate. So that's why when you do a heart transplant, you don't reconnect the vagus nerve. So you have to have a pacemaker to regulate that because the intrinsic pacemaker for the body is the vagus nerve. Okay, so the technical word, I have 2 minutes left and then I'll take questions. The technical word for that slowing down process is parasympathetic. You guys have heard me talk about this so much, as our autonomic nervous system goes from parasympathetic, which is very, very slow, to sympathetic, which is very, very fast. A lot of our stress-based things, some disease processes are related in too much sympathetic or too much fast response. And there's some disorders that are related to too much parasympathetic. But the vagus nerve's primary job is to engage in this parasympathetic, keeping the system under control. So I want to show you a slide, okay? The person is on our lecture right now. This is a professional golfer who I looked at his vagus nerve activity while he was sleeping last night, okay? And this is 8 hours of reading how his vagus nerve is interacting with his heart throughout the night. Okay, so you can see I kind of cut some of it off, but this is over around like 10:30-ish and goes up to about 7 o'clock. Okay, but I want you to see two things on here. Okay, as we kind of finish up this section. Okay, if you can see that orange kind of mountain range that starts, it's a little bit of a mountain range, the orange. And then do you see the orange kind of go down below the surface? So the 0 point is this line going across. And the orange goes down, and then the orange gets bigger and bigger, and it's like almost like a reflection of a mountain range, if you guys can see that. Okay. That orange response is the stress on this person's heart and vagus nerve, how much stress is going on. So isn't this interesting? He starts the night and he goes into bed and he has this higher stress response to these mountains. But as sleep progresses, do you see what happens to the stress? And it doesn't happen just right when he starts sleeping, right? It wasn't until about 1:30 that all of a sudden that orange starts to just bottom out. The stress just goes away. It's just gone to the point that at 6 in the morning, there's just very little stress in there. It's down in the negative range. Anything below the line is negative. Very interesting, right? Because the kicker here, now this is the vagus nerve doing its job, and this is why sleep is so important. This person's level of stress has decreased astronomically in 8 hours. But look what the vagus nerve is doing, which is the light blue. So the light blue kicks in and it's kind of negative. It's weak. The vagal tone is low, okay? Because he's had a long day. He's probably been out in the course doing a lot of different things. He's got some stuff going on. And so the parasympathetic, the brake pedal is kind of worn. It's not doing its job. But then as he progresses through deep sleep and starts to move in and out these 90-minute cycles of sleep and starts to get some REM sleep, do you guys see what starts to happen to the vagus nerve, which was kind of worn and tired? It starts to go up, right? And it starts to increase. So now his vagal tone, we have this blue mountain range. And this is why he's ready to wake up and start the day, because the body went through this massive transformation of very little vagal tone to now he's ready to go. Now, one of the things that we're working on is how do we make that transition happen faster? And how do we make the blue mountains higher and the orange mountains lower? And that's the trick. That's what we're trying to work on. Okay. So next time we meet, I'm going to take a few questions. We have about 8 minutes left. Next time we meet, we're going to talk about the mechanics of how you measure this. Okay. Ways that we can measure it. And we're going to see it in real time. I'm going to hook myself up and we're going to be watching the vagus nerve activity and how we read that and how we get to understand this. This is the holy grail to optimization of health and optimal performance, is getting your arms and your head around this vagus nerve activity. So let me take a look at if we have any questions on here. Let's see. Does anybody, Taylor, do I have any on here that I need to go? You can put it in the chat. If you have a question, can you put it in the chat? So we have a chat window. If you can put a question in the chat. Okay, so in the Royer Neuroscience training, how do we impact the vagus nerve? Great, great question. We impact it from day one because it's a great question. Unlike a lot of these different gadgets that you'll see that are trying to stimulate the nerve externally, they're way too far away from the nerve. They're not going to do it. The number one way to stimulate the vagus nerve is actually through diaphragmatic breathing at a particular rate that causes the vagus nerve to turn on. That's called a resonant frequency. So we have the core elements down in our breathing exercises where we're working on the breathing belt. The number one thing is your mechanics, getting the diaphragm to engage. And when you push that belly out, guess what it pushes up against? The vagus nerve. And when it does that, it activates that nerve. Then what you're going to learn more as we go is how to not just breathe in that 3 to 7 breaths a minute, but there's a certain breath right around 5.5 to 6 breaths a minute that accelerates the vagus nerve activity even more. The other place that we look at this is in our power assessment when we look at coherence and we look at slow frequencies, which are parasympathetic, fast frequencies, which are high frequency sympathetic, and then coherence. That's that green bar. If you guys can remember that, the wider that gets, the stronger my vagus nerve. Why are we working on that? Because that impacts everything. Then when we get to brain activity, we know that theta waves, your slow brain waves, okay, when they're not up in the twos, so they're not a 2.7, they're down below 2, we know that we're not getting enough parasympathetic or rest and recovery, meaning unlike this person here, you're not going to have much blue in the picture And so the theta gets bottomed out. So a daytime EEG of a low theta lets us see, oh, this person's vagus nerve is probably not working. Then the other point is the high betas, which are the fast brain waves. What are those related to? The sympathetic or the fast activity, right? And so we can see that neurologically, we can see that respiratory wise, and we can see that cardiovascularly. And with some of our newer technology that you're going to be seeing, we made some updates to the app recently. You're going to see that we're going to be able to dial into this vagus nerve even more specifically. Um, so another question from my good friend in Philadelphia area. How long with breathing exercises in a given breath session before we get to see the peak vagus nerve activation? Um, so it's not so much the actual like length. Now I do want you to be practicing not just with the computer, okay, but away from the computer. It's actually more about rhythm and how well you can keep the inhale and the exhale to make that consistent pattern that we're looking at. Okay. If we're getting more consistency, we're going to activate that vagus nerve. What the vagus nerve does not like is when you're very inconsistent in your breath. So we're teaching you in the session how to get that consistent breath. But the problem happens a lot of times is people aren't practicing that outside the session. So yes, we can teach it to you. We can move some of the coherence. We can make the vagus nerve a little bit stronger, but we need to be practicing more and more in kind of micro sessions. You don't have to be hooked to the belt. Once you've gotten biomechanics and consistency down, you should be fine. But we want to be practicing that on and on, okay? And doing micro sessions of that. We can also measure that with the polar strap and see what that's doing. But coherence is our biggest measurement of that currently. Um, Here's a client from Oklahoma. Yes, this guy has got to be one of the hardest. You're all hard workers out there. This guy is crazy good. How much he works so hard, and he's got a lot going on. He says, "I've been sick, had a bad night, a bad sleep last night, have quite a bit of brain fog today. However, my heart rate was as low as it gets in the morning, and my uh, the PNS, which is the parasympathetic, and PNS scores were still good when I tested this morning. Why is this the case? The case for this in your particular situation is you have trained so hard and so long. And if you could see this individual's improvement in his vagus nerve activity, um, it is absolutely stunning where he started back in December and where he is now. So he's talking about he's been sick and he's under the weather, but he didn't experience this big drop off. And it's primarily because of a lot of the training he's done. Now, if he stays sick, it will probably gradually start to erode and then he'll have to come back. But right now, that first bump of not feeling well, this is a great example of resilience because you were prepared for this moment in time. You see, all of us, something's coming. Okay. Something is coming. I can guarantee you that. Watch the Kirk Cousins video that he did with me where he said, hey, if it's not knocking on your doorstep, it's coming soon, right? It's coming. And this is what we call dynamic resilience. Dynamic resilience is we're able to be resilient under pressure. Let's see. So I got a long one here, and we'll finish with this. Is the light orange represents the sympathetic as it went into the negative number, and the vagus slowly stabilized at 1 a.m. Trying to stand as I knew we want this number to be in the negative and PNS in positive. Is the light blue on the graph represents the reflection of PNS? Yes. The parasympathetic nervous system activity is the light blue. And our takeaway, the reason I wanted you to see this is what had happened if this guy had only slept 4 hours? Problem, because he didn't have time. See, the reason we call it sleep architecture is you're literally building something with your sleep. If he had stopped at 4 or he had an early flight at 5 or 6 a.m. and skipped out on all the light blue, it would have been very difficult for him to build up his vagus nerve the way we wanted to. Okay, I'm going to be respectful of everybody's time. We're going to meet again in a couple weeks. Okay, 2 weeks from Friday, I am in Naples, so I will not be meeting then. We're working with our clinic there, but it's very likely you'll see something for me from me that Monday. Okay, is what I'm kind of shooting for. I hope you guys like this and you want more of this kind of information. You are going to know more than your doctor on the vagus nerve in the next few weeks if you hang with us. Okay, it's great having you on. We have a recording. If you need it sent out to anybody, just let us know. Okay, thanks. See ya.